Welcome to episode 5 of our great circumnavigation of the Iberian Peninsula. After reluctantly leaving our superb digs in Mora, we began our final day's journey south. We were now well into a Wild West landscape with heat to match. This was our journey through the natural park of the Valley of the Guadiana. Well, actually, that's only the case if I've guessed the translation from the Portuguese correctly. The Rio Guadiana is the great river that flows north to south, marking the border between Spain and Portugal. From here, we would continue south on seemingly endless, hard-packed sandy trails deep into the Algarve hills that would eventually afford first glimpses of the Atlantic as it curls its way round the foot of the Iberian Peninsula to meet the Mediterranean on the Spanish side of the Guadiana. A significant highlight of the day came fairly early on, and what an experience it was. We had arrived at the site of Mina de São Domingos, an abandoned copper mine. Another perhaps less sterile way to put this, at least for those with a more feverish imagination, was to say we had arrived in a kind of horrifically beautiful hell on earth. This incredible and moving post-apocalyptic landscape was actually the remains of what was once the largest mine working in Europe, originally dating from Roman times, but rediscovered by the English in the 18th century and subsequently run by British managers using thousands of Portuguese workers. Between then and the latter part of the 20th century, spanning the period when we Brits really were the world's top dogs when it came to commercial exploitation of other countries' resources, both human and material, it had grown to boast houses, offices, sports facilities, a theatre, a church, an electricity station, and even its own telephone exchange. By the 20th century and the First World War, the demand for copper gave way to a new demand for sulphur to make sulphuric acid, the mining and production of which created terrible health problems for the workers. The mine was finally exhausted by the early 1960s and abandoned entirely in 1966. The British departed, presumably having wrung every last penny of profit, leaving behind a toxic wasteland of contaminated earth, poisoned water, and the rotting, blighted hulks of the mine's industrial monoliths. The haunting desolation of this place has an eerie beauty which could have been created by the artist Anselm Kiefer himself. I'd have happily stayed all day, but with the stagnant water and stained earth, all made of colours that seem to shout, "Do not tarry in this place," and the very real possibility that our bikes, boots and lungs would disintegrate in the noxious atmosphere, we elected to remount and continue south. From now on, the landscape turned pure spaghetti western. But we did not stop to hide behind any boulders pretending to shoot Colt 45s at each other. Disappointing, since I see no reason why, just because one is approaching one's 7th decade on this earth, one should not behave as if one is still enjoying one's first. But in truth, it simply never occurred to either of us to play cowboys and Indians, an outcome I shall certainly consider remedying when revisiting this wonderful country. I won't do it because it would be as tedious to watch as it was superb and wonderful to ride, but it is tempting at this point just to leave you with the hour-and-a-half long footage I shot before both my cameras finally wilted and died in the intense heat. This footage shows a single, non-stop, unbroken trail which appears to have no end. Those of you who have so far been consigned to nothing more than the brief snatches of gate-infested unsurfaced roads still legally accessible in the UK would be, as I was, simply staggered by the sheer scale of what you can still, for the time being at least, ride in this neck of the woods. What a treat, what a privilege! Portugal, I love you! It is well worth cruising along and drinking in the whole atmosphere, but of course it's also available for those who prefer, shall we say, a wider open throttle approach, although eventually the latter will almost certainly result in future generations being ever less likely to be invited back to enjoy the same experience. After all, if you indulge in the motorcycling equivalent of drunken fighting in the vomit-spattered streets of Ayia Napa, you can't really expect the locals to offer a warm welcome next time you knock on their door, can you? Methinks we need to tread carefully if we are to retain our privileges in this world. In the end, we reached the end of Portugal, that is, and the end of any further southerly progress due to being confronted with a large expanse of the briny. After congratulating ourselves on our progress to date with an ice cream, we nudged eastwards along the coast to the last seaside resort before the Guadiana and Spain, that being the town of Monte Gordo. Once apparently rather grand, the place had clearly seen better days, but for me a bit of rundown is never a deal breaker, for therein will always lie the characters and the stories that make travel worth travelling for. Here we stayed for 2 days in order to recover ourselves and our bikes after 5 fairly intense days in the dirt. We found a hotel which was notable for 2 reasons. The first was that they wanted €160 a night for a twin room, but we secured the exact same room for €110 for 2 nights, thanks to Nozzer's judicious use of smartphone booking apps. The second was that the hotel, which had undergone refurbishment during a post-COVID closure, had been operated on by what must have been the cheapest workforce available for employment on the entire Iberian Peninsula. Despite my assumption that what we were looking at in our room was just another representation of a faux traditional look, a sort of Iberian shabby chic, Nozzer rightly insisted that the job simply hadn't been finished. Indeed, the bedroom's raw unpainted plaster walls didn't meet the floors any more than the raw unpainted plaster floors met the walls. What the builders, and I use that term extremely loosely, had in fact created were the perfect conditions for a thriving ant farm, and the local ants wasted no time in taking advantage. The net result of this was that we broke out in the itchiest lower leg bite lumps, which continued to drive us somewhat crazy for several days thereafter. Monte Gordo did reveal some charms though, if one was happy to embrace the usual seaside attraction ghastliness. A swim in the sea was completely refreshing and in no way disappointing in the way that things overly looked forward to can be. Also, we tapped into a robust, for their age, community of friendly expat Brits who were living out their last days rotting and wrinkling amid the sunny delights and apparently having a great deal of fun doing so. There are worse fates, to be sure.
Not enough. My words were cold and flat. You deserve more than that. Another airplane, another sunny place. I'm lucky, I know, but I want to go home. I've got to go home. So let me go home. This was not your dream, but you always believed in me. Another winter's day is come and gone away.
And on that note, I'll close off this first series of episodes. Coming soon will be tales of our continuing journey from southwest to northeast Spain in search of castles, fast twisted tarmac, terrible and not terrible food and accommodation options, and of course, dirt roads. Thanks for watching, and do look out for episode 6, which will appear if and when I get it together. Bye for now!